I'd like to talk about something I'm referring to as Swiss Army architecture. To begin, it's important to understand my analogy. The Swiss Army knife is a multiplication of the shifting needs of its user. This addresses the fact that context isn't static, as Derrida taught us. I'm not advising for an architecture that aims to meet the needs of the future, rather an ethos from its practitioners that understands permanence as a pursuit in futility. Instead of addressing the future, I would like to address context that isn't static. That is to say, I propose an architecture that embraces plasticity. By eliminating the attempt at fixedness, we begin to address the needs of the future more effectively. How can we approach our discipline to make it more adaptable? I'll be covering these rules for application. These are some, but not all, of the ways that we can be less fixed with our design. It's important to make buildings that can adapt, improvise, overcome, evolve, reinvent. Time plagues everything, and because context is temporary, so should our buildings and program, our ethos as architects, and our discipline in general. First, I'll cover the ability to reiterate. The precedent I've chosen is Nicholas Grimshaw's Eden Project. This is a geodesic sphere, or series of spheres, and domes that were implemented in the UK. Its success is rooted in its ability to create different biomes within the same structure. That's a flexibility that's worth striving for. Let's get more into it. That's not what I want to happen. Sorry, guys. On top of its ability to emulate two distinct biomes and house many different types of flora, from winter vegetables to palm trees, the recent expansion to the complex has enabled the conservatory to host outdoor music events. This is a flexibility in program. The second way that you can embrace versatility is to prescribe vagueness. We talked about Bernard Tschumi's Parc des Violettes in class. What I find truly interesting about this project is that architectural follies in the past had just been ornamentation in park spaces. I'm sure that all of you have been to a park that has some sort of massive sculpture. In essence, that's no different than going to a cemetery, but what happens in Bernard Tschumi's park is interesting because his follies are inhabitable. They have no specified program, and this leads to a plasticity. By day, they might be a playground. By night, a concert space, pavilion, shelter. They meet the needs of the user in a way that is not often understood. Incremental building. Recent Pritzker Prize winner Alejandro Aravena is celebrated for his half-house design in Villa Verde. The success of this design was that he admitted he didn't know what his occupants would need from the house itself. He only built half of it for them. It's a repetition that sort of mirrors Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome. It's modular, it can be mass-produced, and it embraces the fact that maybe they aren't ready to build yet. He doesn't understand what their future holds. He's giving them the opportunity to turn this into a patio long term, a second half of their house, whatever the user needs. This admission of understanding that he doesn't fully understand what the future holds, the same way that his client doesn't understand what their future holds, is something that I'd like to embrace in architecture going forward, not only in a residential sense, but in building in general. Rapid reinvention. For this topic, I've chosen the ICA in Boston, though it really could be any contemporary art museum. If you've been to Mass MoCA, it does the same thing. The strong capability of these museums to reinvent themselves on a near monthly basis to showcase new exhibitions is something that I admire quite a lot. It's a plasticity to the fullest extent. What is rigid is the spatial conditions of the building, and yet they reinterpret the circulation, they reimagine the light spaces, the way that you interact with the art. Everything is prescribed by the way that they've designed it, and it is very fixed, except that it's constantly innovating and readdressing the exact same spatial conditions to bring you into a completely new space every time you're there. That parlays very well into my last point of selfless collaboration. This point speaks to my current professional status. IKD collaborated with Renzo Piano to make the extension on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Because of that, our office gets all of the exhibition jobs. We have to recreate the gallery space into whatever the artist's vision entails. Because of our knowledge of the space itself, we know when we can and cannot do what the artist is asking for. We know how best to steer the artist in the right direction. And it forces this humble nature on both parties to work together to create something, once again on a monthly basis, that is completely new in a space that we know like the back of our hand. It's an interesting dichotomy of knowing something so well without ever tiring of it, reinventing itself constantly. It's the David Bowie of buildings, or exactly like I've said, the Swiss Army knife. It's important to implement all of these things into architecture, our discipline, the architect himself, and the buildings that we make, so that we can rightfully address the future. It's important to stop striving for permanence or guessing what the future entails, and create an architecture that will be ready to change for the future's needs. The population density that we're seeing in urban areas and the population crisis that's sweeping the world can only be addressed by being less fixated with the program of our buildings, because we have no idea what they'll need to entail to fully function in the future.